Sharon Stone. A name etched deep into Hollywood's history, a woman whose very presence redefined power, beauty, and danger. With basic instinct, she didn't just play a role, she created a cultural earthquake. Catherine Tremell became more than a character, she became an obsession. Overnight, Sharon was crowned the ultimate sex symbol of the 1992nd. Her face and allure dominating every red carpet, every magazine cover, every whispered fantasy. For a time, it seemed she was invincible, adored, untouchable, envied by millions. But just as her star blazed brightest, fate struck her with unimaginable cruelty. A brain hemorrhage ripped through her life, leaving doctors with a grim verdict: only a 1% chance to live. For 9 endless days, Sharon drifted on the edge of death, stripped of memory, unable to walk, her marriage dissolving, and the child she cherished torn from her arms. Most would never recover. Most would have disappeared into silence. But Sharon Stone was not most people. She clawed her way back, scarred but unbroken. And yet, even now at 67, when the world believes her storms are over, another devastating trial has come crashing down, threatening what little peace she has left. Long before the flashing lights of Hollywood, Sharon Stone was just a small-town girl in the steel heart of Pennsylvania. Born in 1958, in the industrial town of Meadville, her childhood was shaped by the scent of smoke, the weight of hard labor, and the quiet dignity of people who knew struggle as a way of life. Her father, Joseph, was a skilled tool and die maker, a man whose hands were permanently scarred by decades of bending steel into submission. He was strict, unyielding, a man who believed discipline was love, even when it felt cold and merciless. Her mother, Dorothy, carried a softer strength. By day, she balanced numbers as an accountant, and by night she balanced the family itself, ensuring that her children knew warmth even when the world outside offered none. From her earliest years, Sharon burned with a mind that set her apart. An IQ of 154 made her a prodigy on paper, but in the narrow classrooms of a small town, it felt more like a curse. Her thoughts moved faster than her peers could follow, and instead of admiration, she met whispers, stares, and cruel laughter. "I always felt like I was living in a world that didn't speak my language," she would later recall, her voice carrying the ache of a girl who longed to belong. At home, the sharp contrast of her parents' love shaped her. Her father's discipline could feel like steel itself, unyielding and cold, but one rare, heartfelt conversation softened that barrier, showing Sharon that even the sternest hearts could bend. Her mother's devotion, steady and constant, became the quiet anchor she would cling to through storms still to come. In Meadville's narrow streets, Sharon Stone was forged. Surrounded by steel, smoke, and hardship, she learned that strength wasn't born in the spotlight, it was learned in silence, in surviving ridicule, and in carrying dignity like armor. Life never allowed Sharon Stone an easy childhood. At just 9 years old, she was rushed to the hospital with a severe neck injury that terrified her family. Though she survived, the shadow of fragility clung to her, a reminder that her body could break without warning. 5 years later, at 14, another cruel twist struck. A carefree afternoon on horseback ended in horror when she was thrown violently to the ground. Pain seared through her neck and shoulders, injuries that would linger for years. Each morning, she woke with an ache that reminded her how thin the line was between freedom and catastrophe. And yet, even as her young body carried these scars, Sharon's spirit refused to surrender. She learned to hide her pain, to smile even when every movement burned. Those experiences carved into her a hard truth. Life is never safe. Survival is never guaranteed. It must be fought for, again and again. Looking back, Sharon would one day admit that those injuries did more than leave physical marks. They hardened her resolve, teaching her to endure. Long before she faced the ruthless world of Hollywood, she had already been trained by pain itself to never bow, never break. While most teenagers were still fumbling through adolescence, Sharon Stone was already years ahead. By 15, She had not only finished high school but also secured a scholarship to Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania. On paper, it was a triumph, a small-town girl proving she was destined for more. But beneath the surface, the achievement carried a quiet ache. She was younger than nearly everyone around her, an outsider once again, her mind racing ahead while her heart longed for connection. While others were still exploring who they were, Sharon carried dreams too large for the narrow walls of Meadville. She studied relentlessly, but with each passing year, her gaze drifted further beyond the steel mills and smoke-stained skies of her hometown. Even then, she sensed her life was meant to stretch past Pennsylvania, past the ordinary paths laid before her. The discipline of her father, the tenderness of her mother, the loneliness of her brilliance, and the haunting scars of her accidents. They weren't random pieces. They were shaping her into someone who would one day stand in front of cameras and command entire rooms with a single glance. The young girl who once felt alien in her own world was slowly preparing for a stage far bigger than she could imagine. And though she didn't yet know it, the trials of her childhood were not weights holding her back, they were the fire forging her into Sharon Stone. By 1976, Sharon was barely 18, but the world outside her small town was already calling her name. At the urging of her family, she entered a local beauty pageant. It seemed like nothing more than a small-town contest, but that single decision became her first real turning point. Against the odds, Sharon won. That crown wasn't just a symbol of beauty, it was a golden key. It opened a door that led her far from Meadville's narrow streets and into the gleaming lights of New York City. Soon after, she signed with the Ford modeling agency, one of the most prestigious in the world. Her face began appearing on glossy magazine covers, her smile frozen in the flashes of 1,000 cameras. From the outside, it looked like a dream, but on the inside, Sharon felt caged. Modeling gave her money, fame, and recognition, but none of it touched her soul. It looked beautiful from the outside, she later admitted, but inside, I felt like a mannequin seen but never heard. Her restless heart longed for something greater, something real. She wanted to move people, not just pose for them. The still-life perfection of modeling couldn't contain the fire within her. It was acting, storytelling, emotion, truth that she craved. And though Hollywood's gates were still far away, Sharon Stone had already made a silent vow. She would not settle for being just another pretty face. When Sharon turned toward acting, she expected the path to be steep, but nothing could have prepared her for the relentless wall of rejection. Casting rooms in New York and Los Angeles became battlegrounds. Time after time, she was told she wasn't sexy enough, or not the right kind of beautiful. Every dismissal landed like a stone in her chest, each no echoing long after the audition ended. She would walk into waiting rooms filled with women who seemed to fit Hollywood's mold, more perfectly, taller, flashier, more conventional. Sharon sat there, clutching her script, knowing that talent alone rarely mattered in an industry obsessed with surface. Sometimes she wasn't even allowed to finish a line before being dismissed with polite indifference. Other times, the rejection came with words sharp enough to scar, "We don't see you as a leading woman." But Sharon refused to let those words define her. If Hollywood couldn't see her worth, she would fight until they had no choice. In those long, bruising years, she took every opportunity she could, no matter how small or thankless. Commercials, background roles, screen tests that never led anywhere. She treated each moment not as failure, but as training. At night, she poured herself into acting classes, studying technique, dissecting scripts, practicing until her body ached and her voice trembled. She wasn't just waiting for a role to come, she was sharpening herself for the day it finally did. The late 1972nd were not years of triumph, but of quiet survival. Yet they were the forge where Sharon Stone's resilience was hammered into shape. She was learning to face rejection, to transform humiliation into fuel. It was the kind of grit no magazine cover could ever give her, the kind of strength that only a dreamer on the edge of despair could discover. By 1980, after years of rejection and near invisibility, Sharon finally slipped through Hollywood's gates, if only by inches. Woody Allen cast her in Stardust Memories. It was a role so small most viewers might blink and miss her. But to Sharon, it was monumental. For the first time, she wasn't just posing for a camera, she was acting on film, tasting the life she had been chasing for years. A year later, she appeared in Deadly Blessing, 1981, a low-budget horror film that demanded long hours, grueling conditions, and very little pay. It wasn't glamorous, the sets were rough, the work exhausting, but for Sharon, it was priceless. She was finally learning how to move on a set, how to hold her own lines, how to become more than just a face framed by light. By 1984, she had landed a role in Irreconcilable Differences. Sharing scenes with seasoned stars, she soaked up every detail, studying the rhythm of their delivery, the subtleties of expression, the way they carried themselves between takes. These roles didn't make headlines, but they became stepping stones, small sparks of light flickering in what still felt like a long tunnel of obscurity. Every credit added to her resume was another stone in the foundation she was building. Quietly, stubbornly, without permission from anyone but herself, she learned to enter auditions expecting rejection, yet leaving with the quiet pride of having tried. She learned to hold her posture even when the no came instantly, before she'd read a single line. Looking back, Sharon would one day say, "Those years were not wasted at all, they were survival training." The industry tested her again and again, asking if she would give up, and again, she answered with defiance. "It's easy to shine when the world is clapping for you," she said later. "Real strength is when you stand alone in the dark and clap for yourself." And the young woman who once felt alien in her hometown classrooms was now learning a new kind of survival, this time in Hollywood. And slowly, with every slammed door, she was becoming someone impossible to ignore. As the 1982nd wore on, Sharon's career was still a collection of bit parts and forgettable credits. To many in Hollywood, she was invisible. But to Sharon, each rejection, each small role, was sharpening her resolve. She learned to walk into casting rooms, not expecting kindness, but armed with determination. Sometimes she was dismissed before finishing her first line. Other times, she endured the cold stare of casting directors who barely looked up from their notes. The sting was real, but Sharon refused to crumble. Every no became fuel. Every door slammed in her face became another reason to knock harder on the next one. She began to see rejection as part of her training. In lobbies crowded with women who all looked like they belonged, Sharon reminded herself she wasn't there to blend in, she was there to stand out. She started focusing less on being right for the part and more on bringing something undeniable, something only she could offer. In private, she threw herself deeper into her craft. Acting classes consumed her nights. She dissected scripts line by line, practiced scenes until her voice cracked, studied film reels to understand what made performances immortal. She was determined that when her moment finally came, she wouldn't just be ready, she would be unforgettable. Looking back years later, Sharon would call these her darkest but most important lessons. Anyone can shine when the spotlight is on them, she reflected. But real strength comes from clapping for yourself when no one else is watching. These years weren't glamorous, but they forged her resilience. They transformed her from a small-town outsider into a fighter, someone who knew that true survival wasn't about luck. It was about refusing to quit when the world dared you to. By 1992, Sharon Stone was 34 years old. She had survived more than a decade of auditions, rejections, and roles too small for anyone to remember. But all of it had been leading to one script, Basic Instinct. The role of Catherine Trammell was the kind of part that could either make or destroy a career. The enigmatic novelist, seductive, brilliant, and dangerous, required an actress fearless enough to embrace controversy and skilled enough to carry the weight of every scene. Big names were already in the running. Women with more fame, more power, more connections. Sharon had little compared to them, but she walked into the audition with quiet fire in her eyes. She had prepared for this moment her entire life, through the humiliation of casting calls, through the loneliness of rejection, through the years of standing in the shadows. When the cameras rolled, she didn't just read Catherine, she became her. Every glance, every pause, every carefully calculated silence left the room frozen. It was as if Sharon had been waiting her whole life to prove she was more than just another pretty face. And this time, no one could look away. Landing the role was triumph. Shooting the film, however, was a battlefield. Director Paul Verhoeven pushed her to the edge, demanding fearlessness, demanding surrender. Sharon gave everything: her intelligence, her allure, her raw nerves to create a character the world would never forget. Then came the scene, the infamous leg-crossing moment. Sharon would later admit she hadn't anticipated the way it would be shot, but once released, it ignited a firestorm. Overnight, the scene became one of the most talked-about moments in film history: scandalous, debated, unforgettable. The reaction was explosive. Praise, shock, criticism, desire. Her name was suddenly everywhere. Magazine covers, late-night talk shows, billboards spanning from Los Angeles to Tokyo. Her salary leapt from modest 6 figures to millions. She went from renting a small home to owning a Beverly Hills estate, from coach seats to private jets. One night she went to bed as Sharon Stone, struggling actress. The next morning, she woke up as Sharon Stone, global icon. "I went to bed one person and woke up another," she would later say, still marveling at the dizzying speed of it all. But fame, as she would soon discover, never comes without shadows. The success of Basic Instinct was dazzling, but its shadow was suffocating. The label sex symbol clung to Sharon Stone like a second skin, one she could never peel away. The world now saw her as Catherine Trammell, seductive, dangerous, untouchable, and Hollywood began flooding her with scripts that were nothing more than cheap copies of the role that made her famous. The checks were huge, the offers endless, but Sharon felt trapped. She hadn't fought her way through years of rejection to become a stereotype. She wanted roles that challenged her mind as much as her beauty, scripts that tested her craft, instead of reducing her to a single provocative image. But the industry wasn't listening. To Hollywood, she was the fantasy they had sold to the world. Producers and directors wanted more seduction, more scandal, more Catherine. Her own voice, her intelligence, her depth was drowned out by the noise of her sudden fame. Looking back, she would call it both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because it made her name immortal. A curse because it tried to lock her into a prison of other people's desires. To be seen in a way that only shows half of who you are, she later reflected, is a very lonely kind of fame. So Sharon did the only thing she knew how to do: fight. She refused the hollow scripts, even when they promised millions. She gambled her career on the hope that Hollywood would eventually see beyond the surface. It was a dangerous choice in an industry where visibility is survival, but she had been forged in struggle. She would rather risk everything than betray herself. And just 3 years later, she would prove to the world that she was far more than the image they tried to trap her in. By 1995, Sharon Stone had grown tired of being Hollywood's most profitable illusion. She was desperate for a role that could break the chains of the sex symbol label. That chance came when Martin Scorsese cast her in Casino. The role of Ginger McKenna was everything. Catherine Trammell was not messy, volatile, raw. Ginger was a storm of contradictions, glamorous on the surface, broken and vulnerable underneath. A woman capable of both fiery love and destructive chaos. To bring her to life required more than beauty. It demanded courage, truth, and the ability to bare one's soul on screen. Sharon threw herself into the part with a ferocity that stunned even her co-stars. She immersed herself in Ginger's world, studying women caught in the glitter and grime of Las Vegas, drawing from her own scars of heartbreak and survival. Every scream, every tear, every trembling silence felt lived, not performed. When Casino hit theaters, critics who once dismissed her as a one-dimensional seductress were forced to admit the truth. Sharon Stone was an actress of staggering power. Her portrayal earned her a Golden Globe Award for Best Actress and an Academy Award nomination, Hollywood's highest recognition that she was far more than just a beautiful face. The performance didn't just shatter the glass box she had been trapped in. It reminded the world that Sharon Stone had always been more than Catherine Trammell. She could carry a story, command the screen, and hold her own alongside giants like Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci. But even as she basked in the glow of critical acclaim, Sharon knew roles like Ginger were rare. Hollywood still wanted to pull her back into the cage of typecasting, tempting her with massive paychecks for parts that mirrored Catherine. Turning them down meant risking her place in the spotlight, but Sharon chose her integrity over the illusion of security. Her victory in Casino was proof to herself and the world that she had the range, the fire, and the depth. Yet it was also a warning. For every moment of triumph in Hollywood, another battle waited in the shadows. Even after the triumph of Casino, Sharon Stone discovered that success in Hollywood didn't mean freedom. The industry still tried to drag her back into the same gilded cage. Studio executives kept sending her scripts drenched in seduction but stripped of substance, empty echoes of Catherine Trammell or watered-down shades of Ginger McKenna. The money was staggering. Each offer came with numbers that would make most actors say yes without hesitation. But Sharon, hardened by years of rejection and emboldened by her new acclaim, refused to sell herself short. She wasn't interested in cashing in on a stereotype. She wanted roles that demanded her mind, her heart, her depth, not just her body. It was a dangerous stand to take. In Hollywood, visibility is survival, and turning down big projects can mean being forgotten overnight. But Sharon had never chosen the safe road. She had built her career by taking risks, and this was no different. Each no was another bet on herself, another declaration that she was more than the image they tried to trap her in. She diversified, slipping into television, where she brought steel and intensity to Law and Order, SVU, playing a fearless prosecutor. Years later, in 2013, she stunned audiences again with a chilling turn in Lovelace, proving she could still disappear into characters that demanded nuance and weight. Still, the struggle was constant. For every project that challenged her, a dozen more came that threatened to undo the progress she had fought for. The glamour of red carpets and million-dollar contracts was always shadowed by the grind of saying no, by the heavy silence that followed when producers moved on to someone more cooperative. Looking back on those years, Sharon summed it up with brutal honesty. Success is not the prize, it's the test. What you do with it, that's who you really are. In the end, the 1,992nd were more than her rise to superstardom. They were the years when Sharon Stone proved she would not be defined by anyone, not by critics, not by audiences, not even by Hollywood itself. And yet, as her professional battles raged, her personal life was quietly slipping into shadows of heartbreak. Behind the blinding lights of her career, Sharon's heart was quietly learning its own lessons, ones far more painful than any rejection in Hollywood. In 1984, at just 26, she married television producer Michael Greenberg. To the outside world, it looked perfect. A rising actress, and a man who understood the demanding rhythms of the industry. Together, they seemed ready to build a life side by side. At first, the dream felt real. They attended events together, whispered about homes they might buy, children they might raise. Sharon, who had long felt like an outsider in her career, finally believed she had found someone who would anchor her, who would make her feel less alone in the chaos. But reality crept in quickly. The endless separations, the late nights, and the invisible weight of two careers pulling in opposite directions began to erode what they had built. Friends would later recall seeing Sharon at premieres, dazzling on the red carpet, yet standing alone, her luminous smile unable to hide the quiet distance in her eyes. By 1987, just 3 years after they had vowed to share a future, the marriage was over. Sharon was 29, without children, without a lasting partnership, left with a silence she hadn't expected. She rarely spoke of Michael in later years, never with bitterness, only with the quiet resignation of someone who had loved, lost, and accepted the lesson. "Some endings don't need blame," she would say softly. "They just leave a silence you learn to live with." For Sharon, the dissolution of that marriage wasn't just a failed romance, it was the first bitter proof that even as her star in Hollywood rose higher, her personal life could still collapse into shadows. It was a scar she carried quietly, one that reminded her that the spotlight could never protect her heart. Even with the wounds of her first marriage still fresh, Sharon still believed in love. In 1988, at 30 years old, she met country music star Dwight Yoakam, a man whose charisma seemed to light up a room before he even entered it, whose voice carried a blend of vulnerability and swagger that mirrored the contradictions in Sharon herself. To a woman emerging from heartbreak, Dwight felt like a second chance. Their connection was instant, a spark that burned brighter than the noise of Hollywood. They were seen at industry events, but what Sharon cherished most were the quiet moments, the late-night conversations over simple meals, the long drives with music humming in the background, the rare comfort of ordinary happiness in a life that was anything but ordinary. She later admitted, "I thought maybe this was the love that would heal the cracks and let me breathe again." For a brief time, it seemed possible, but the lives they lived were built on constant motion. Dwight's world revolved around tours and recording sessions, Sharon's around auditions, shoots, and long days on set. Their schedules collided more often than they aligned, leaving Sharon once again in hotel rooms alone, the silence echoing louder than any applause. There were no dramatic betrayals, no scandals splashed across tabloids, just the slow unraveling that happens when two people want love but can't hold on to it through distance and time. When the relationship ended, it was with respect, but also with an unspoken grief. Sharon later reflected, "Sometimes the hardest goodbyes are the gentle ones, because there's nothing to fix, just something you can't hold on to." It left her with no anger, only the ache of what might have been. And so, even as her career inched closer to the breakthrough she had fought so long for, Sharon's heart carried yet another invisible bruise. In Hollywood, she was beginning to learn a cruel truth. The brighter the lights burned, the easier it was for love to slip quietly through her fingers. By 1993, Sharon Stone was 35, standing at a career peak few actors ever reach. Basic instinct had turned her into a global phenomenon, and Hollywood was watching her every move. Yet, behind the dazzling gowns and flashing cameras, Sharon carried a quieter longing, a dream of stability, of building a home untouched by the chaos of fame. That year, she met San Francisco businessman William J. McDonald. Unlike the men she had known in Hollywood, William wasn't chasing the spotlight. He was successful, grounded, and offered a kind of steadiness Sharon had been searching for. Their connection was quick, almost effortless. Friends remembered the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about him, her voice softening when she described the life they imagined together. Within months, William proposed. To Sharon, the engagement felt like a turning point, a chance to finally balance her professional triumph with personal peace. Together, they were spotted strolling along San Francisco's marina, enjoying quiet dinners, and spending weekends away from the relentless noise of Hollywood. For the first time in years, Sharon seemed calmer, anchored by the belief that she had found a love strong enough to weather the storms. But the peace was fragile. William's former wife made public comments that cast long shadows over their relationship, feeding tabloid speculation and forcing their private life into the glare of unwanted scrutiny. Sharon chose silence, never addressing the rumors directly, but the tension seeped in. The life she had hoped would remain untouched by Hollywood's spotlight was slowly unraveling under its weight. Their love wasn't destroyed by explosive fights or betrayal, but by something quieter, more insidious, the slow erosion of trust and ease. Conversations that once flowed turned guarded, weekends together grew shorter, and the vision of a shared future began to blur. By the end of that same year, it was over. The engagement ended not with a dramatic scene, but with a single FedEx package, a diamond ring returned in a box. For Sharon, it was a brutal symbol of how something once filled with promise could be reduced to a formality. She rarely spoke of William afterward, only once admitting, "Not every love story is meant to last from beginning to end. Some are only meant to teach us about ourselves." Oh, and so, As 1994 began, Sharon Stone stood alone again, not defeated, but scarred by yet another invisible wound. She was a woman who had conquered Hollywood, yet in her private life, she was still searching for the one thing fame could never buy: lasting love. By 1998, Sharon Stone was 40 years old, a woman at the very height of her fame, yet yearning for something deeper than applause. That year, she married Phil Bronstein, a respected journalist and editor. To Sharon, Phil represented everything she thought she needed: stability, intellect, and the possibility of finally building a life beyond the glare of Hollywood. Their wedding was intimate, far removed from red carpets and flashing bulbs, but the joy it carried was vast. Sharon believed she had finally found her safe harbor. In those tender early months, she glowed with a happiness that friends said they hadn't seen in years. Candlelit dinners at home, Sunday mornings with newspapers scattered across the kitchen table, soft-spoken plans for the future. All of it felt like a balm poured over the scars of her past. "I thought I'd found my forever," she would later confess. More than anything, Sharon longed to be a mother. With Phil by her side, she dared to believe that dream could come true. But fate showed no mercy. Already battling an autoimmune disease and endometriosis, Sharon faced crushing odds. Between 1998 and 2000, she endured multiple miscarriages. Each loss was devastating, each hope snatched away before it had a chance to grow. She called it silent grief, a heartbreak that seeped into her bones while the rest of the world carried on as if nothing had happened. At 42, Sharon confronted the brutal truth. Her dream of carrying a biological child was slipping away. She tried to smile for the cameras, to keep playing the role of Hollywood's radiant star, but inside, she was crumbling. "I wanted to be strong, but inside, I was breaking apart," she admitted years later. Then, in 2000, came what felt like a miracle. Sharon and Phil adopted a baby boy, Rowan. From the moment she held him, she felt an overwhelming rush of love and purpose. "The second I saw him, I knew I was his mother," she said. For a time, Rowan's laughter stitched cracks into her marriage, filling their home with the sweetness of bedtime stories and birthdays. But even joy could not erase the strain. The grief of lost pregnancies lingered like ghosts. The demands of Sharon's career and Phil's unrelenting schedule as a journalist tugged them apart. Sharon often felt split in two red carpet star one night, exhausted mother the next, caught between two worlds that seemed impossible to balance. "I felt like I was failing at both," she confessed. Then came the most merciless blow of all, a catastrophic brain hemorrhage that left her with only a 1% chance of survival. While Sharon was still learning to walk, to speak, to piece her life back together, her marriage began to collapse. In 2003, Phil filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. As if that weren't cruel enough, the custody battle that followed stripped Sharon of what mattered most: her son. Courtrooms dissected her motherhood, reducing her to humiliating accusations. Could a woman who once acted in an R-rated film truly be fit to raise a child? At one point, even a bizarre rumor about cosmetic surgery on her feet appeared in the legal documents, twisting the knife deeper. In 2008, the court awarded Phil full custody of Rowan. Sharon, devastated, was left with visitation rights. "I lost my family," she said simply, her voice breaking under the weight of years she could never get back. Her marriage to Phil Bronstein had begun as a promise of forever and ended as the cruelest crucible of her life. Love, loss, and resilience collided in ways both beautiful and brutal. It could have destroyed her completely. Instead, it forced her to endure, scarred but still standing. It was 2001, and Sharon Stone's world shattered in an instant. What began as an ordinary day ended with searing pain exploding inside her head, a brain hemorrhage so massive that doctors later said she had only a 1% chance of survival. In those first terrifying moments, her vision blurred, her balance vanished, and the world itself seemed to dissolve around her. Sharon would later describe the sensation as slipping out of her own body, hovering in a place between life and death, unsure if she would ever return. For 9 endless days, she drifted in that liminal space, the people around her praying, the doctors doubtful, the odds mercilessly stacked against her. It wasn't her first brush with mortality. As a child, she had been hospitalized for a neck injury. At 14, she'd been thrown from a horse, and once she had even been struck by lightning. But this was different. Those earlier accidents were warnings. This was a battle for her very life. Through the fog of fear, one thought tethered her to this world: her son Rowan. She could not bear the idea of him growing up without her, of him forgetting the sound of her voice or the warmth of her embrace. "I thought about him every second," she said later. "If I had to crawl through fire to get back to him, I would." That love became her anchor, her lifeline. Yet the cruelty did not stop there. The hemorrhage was followed by a stroke and massive internal bleeding. Worse, the diagnosis had been delayed, dismissed at first, by doctors who misread her symptoms. A failure of care she later called medical gaslighting. By the time the truth was recognized, her brain was swelling dangerously, and time was slipping away. Against all odds, Sharon survived. But surviving was only the beginning of a far longer war. Recovery didn't take weeks or months. It consumed 7 years of her life. She had to relearn everything most people take for granted: how to walk without collapsing, how to read without words scattering across the page, how to sign her own name, how to speak without losing her train of thought. Every small task became a mountain, every step a victory, and she did it without the safety net most might expect. She had no specialized health insurance to cover the grueling rehabilitation, no team of experts assigned to guide her recovery. Instead, she pieced together exercises on her own, forcing herself to practice day after day even when progress was agonizingly slow, sometimes invisible. The physical toll was brutal, but the emotional devastation was just as heavy. Hollywood, with its short memory and ruthless appetite for the next star, moved on without her. Casting calls that once clamored for her name grew silent. Roles slipped away. Projects that had been hers suddenly went to others. The woman who had once commanded millions per film now found herself overlooked, forgotten, and dismissed. Her bank account, once flush with years of success, drained, rapidly eaten away by medical bills, legal costs from her custody battle, and the absence of high-paying roles. She spoke candidly later of how her $18 million in savings vanished, and how many of her assets were not even held in her name. For a woman who had once been at the top of the world, it was an almost surreal descent. She had lost her health, her marriage, her fortune, and full custody of her son, all in the span of just a few years. And yet, in the midst of despair, Sharon discovered a strange, unshakable resilience. She celebrated tiny victories. A good day was walking across a room without holding the wall. A triumph was reading Rowan a bedtime story from beginning to end, without stumbling over the words. "I felt like I had been reborn in my own body," she later said. "But it was a body I had to get to know all over again." For most, such a fall would have been the end. But for Sharon Stone, the woman who had been forged in hardship since childhood, it was only another storm to survive. Surviving the brain hemorrhage was only half the battle. The other half was returning to a world that seemed to have no place for her anymore. Hollywood, so quick to crown her after Basic Instinct and Casino, was just as quick to forget her when she faltered. The casting calls that once overflowed with offers now fell silent. Producers whispered that she wasn't the same, that her illness had taken away her edge, that the mystery which once made her magnetic was gone. She had been a headline, a sensation, but now, in their eyes, she was damaged goods. It was a cruelty Sharon never expected. She had fought for her life, clawed her way back from the edge of death, only to find the industry she gave everything to had quietly moved on. Projects that once seemed hers slipped into the hands of younger, healthier actresses. Invitations to the A-list parties dried up. For an industry obsessed with youth, perfection, and constant relevance, Sharon Stone had become yesterday's news. Financially, the collapse was devastating. Years of medical bills from her recovery and the crushing legal costs of her custody battle drained her once massive fortune. At her peak, Sharon had nearly $18 million in savings. After the storm, most of it was gone. Some of her assets weren't even under her own name, leaving her vulnerable and scrambling to rebuild. The woman who had flown on private jets and owned multi-million-dollar estates now found herself humbled in ways she never imagined. She confessed later that there were nights she lay awake wondering if she would lose everything, not just her career, but her dignity, her sense of self. But Sharon refused to let Hollywood's betrayal destroy her. Instead, she measured her victories differently. A victory wasn't a starring role or a headline. It was standing on her own 2 feet without stumbling. It was reading Rowan a story without losing her place. It was surviving another day in a world that had turned its back on her. And through that silence, Sharon discovered something extraordinary. The same resilience that had carried her through a lonely childhood, brutal rejections, failed relationships, and catastrophic illness began to flicker again. The industry might have forgotten her, but Sharon Stone had not forgotten who she was. Her fall from grace could have ended her story. Instead, it became the crucible that would shape the second act of her life, one not built on Hollywood's approval, but on her own unshakable will to rise again. For most people, the devastation Sharon Stone endured would have marked the end. But for her, it became the beginning of a different kind of life. Instead of retreating into silence, she chose to rebuild herself, this time from the inside out. Her first step toward healing came not from film, but from art. Painting, a passion she had carried quietly for years, became her sanctuary. On canvas, she could express what words could not: the fractured light of memory, the violent colors of loss, the fragile hues of healing. Each stroke was a release, each finished piece a survival story etched in paint. Soon, her private therapy turned public. Sharon held exhibitions in San Francisco and Berlin, with her work later shown in Rome alongside some of the world's most celebrated contemporary artists. "Painting gave me a new way to speak," she said. "It's how I tell the truth I can't say out loud." But Sharon's rebirth extended far beyond art. She turned her pain into a force for others. She threw herself into philanthropy, raising more than $34 million for HIV, AIDS research, funding schools in underserved communities, and personally supporting shelters for homeless youth. For Sharon, giving wasn't about polishing an image. It was about transforming suffering into purpose. "When you survive what you think will kill you," she explained, "you realize you have a responsibility to help others survive too." Motherhood also became the anchor of her new life. In addition to Rowan, Sharon adopted 2 more sons, Laird and Quinn. Becoming the mother of 3 reshaped her priorities entirely. She no longer saw herself simply as a star or survivor. She was a mother first. She cooked breakfasts, attended school events, listened to their stories at night. She once admitted with a smile, "I used to think I needed a man to feel complete, but my children make me whole in ways I never imagined." Her personal rebirth flowed into her professional life. She returned to acting, not chasing the blockbuster roles she once commanded, but choosing projects that resonated with her evolving sense of self. Modeling, once a stepping stone, now became another creative outlet, surprisingly lucrative and empowering. Meanwhile, her art began to generate recognition and income, proving that Sharon's creativity extended far beyond the screen. By 2025, her financial situation had stabilized. Reports estimated her net worth between $25 and $60 million, no longer the staggering fortune she once had, but a testament to her resilience and her ability to reinvent herself. She lived in her beloved West Hollywood home, the sanctuary she had owned for more than 25 years, while continuing to manage investments, real estate, and her growing art career. But more than wealth or fame, Sharon had found something she had once thought impossible: peace. Meditation, light exercise, and a deep respect for her body became part of her daily rhythm. "I've made friends with my body," she said. It's carried me through more than I ever thought possible, and now I honor it in a way I never did before. Through art, motherhood, and advocacy, Sharon Stone rose again, not as the woman the world once defined, but as the woman she had always been becoming. By her late 60s, Sharon Stone had reshaped her life into something the younger version of herself might never have imagined. The woman who once lived on private jets and red carpets now found her joy in quieter rhythms, morning coffee in her West Hollywood home, afternoons spent painting, evenings listening to the laughter of her 3 sons. Her financial stability had returned not to the dizzying heights of her Hollywood prime, but enough to give her comfort and independence. With real estate holdings, art sales, and investments, estimates placed her net worth between $25 and $60 million. It was less about the number and more about the security it represented. She had fallen from the top before and rebuilt from nothing. Now she had built a foundation that no storm could so easily take away. But Sharon's new fame wasn't measured in box office numbers or magazine covers. It came from recognition of her resilience. In 2024, she was honored among the BBC's 100 Women, celebrated not only for her talent but for her strength and advocacy. That same year, she walked the red carpet at the Turin Film Festival, not as the scandalous icon of the 1992nd, but as a woman admired for surviving, for transforming pain into art. In 2025, she returned to the Golden Globes with a presence entirely her own, confident, radiant, and free from the need to prove herself. Her film projects continued, though she no longer chased the spotlight. What About Love in 2024, and upcoming titles like Nobody 2 and In Memoriam in 2025, were choices made not for money or fame, but because they spoke to her heart. Meanwhile, her paintings continued to draw attention from galleries around the world. Sharon Stone, once reduced to a label, had become something richer: an actress, an artist, a philanthropist, a mother. Most of all, she embraced aging with a grace Hollywood rarely allows. She rejected Botox, avoided the trap of cosmetic illusions, and instead chose to live authentically, honoring the body that had carried her through storms. Meditation, gentle exercise, and gratitude became her daily rituals. "I don't need to be who I was to be happy," she said softly. "I'm still shining, just in a different way." Her fame now was quieter, deeper, and perhaps more meaningful than at any other time. She had survived the frenzy of superstardom, the cruelty of loss, the indifference of Hollywood, and the near death that almost took her away. What remained was not the Sharon Stone the world once consumed, but the Sharon Stone who had found peace in simply being. Sharon Stone's story is not just about Hollywood, it is about survival. From a steel town in Pennsylvania to the heights of global fame, from the heartbreak of broken marriages to the devastation of a brain hemorrhage, she has endured storms that would have destroyed most people. Yet every time, she rose again scarred, but never defeated. Her legacy is not only the unforgettable roles she gave us, Catherine Trammell in Basic Instinct, Ginger McKenna in Casino, or the countless characters that shimmered across screen, but the truth she revealed about what it means to be human. She showed us that beauty and fame are fleeting, but resilience, courage, and authenticity endure. Once labeled a sex symbol, Sharon redefined herself as an artist, a philanthropist, and above all, a mother. Through her paintings, she turned suffering into color. Through her activism, she transformed pain into purpose, raising millions for HIV, AIDS research, and fighting for the vulnerable. Through her motherhood, she discovered a love that made her whole, even when the world tried to strip everything else away. Now, at 67, she no longer needs the world's applause to validate her. She lives in the quiet strength of someone who has faced death and chosen life again and again. "If I can come back from everything, so can you," she often says, offering her journey not as tragedy, but as testimony. Sharon Stone's legacy is not one of perfection, but of survival with grace. She reminds us that beauty is not in the absence of scars, it is in the courage to carry them with dignity, and in the light that shines through even the deepest fractures. From the glittering premieres of the past to the canvases she now paints, Sharon Stone has never stopped shining. Her light has simply changed color, warmer, deeper, more enduring. And in that transformation lies her greatest gift, proof that no matter how dark the storm, the human spirit can always find its way back to the light.